The day humanity was declared slaves, the galaxy faced Earth's wrath. The vote was already over by the time I found my seat. I remember standing in the doorway of the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Conclave, holding a datapad I no longer needed, watching the holographic tally board cycle through its final count. 31 votes in favour, 4 against, 11 abstentions, and just like that, in a room full of beings who had never once set foot on Earth, my species ceased to be free. I am Owen Garrett. At the time, I was 29 years old, junior diplomatic attaché to Ambassador Yara Osei of the United Earth Mission. I had been in that role for 14 months. I had never attended a full conclave session before. I had never expected to attend one under these circumstances. The chamber was enormous, a circular hall carved into the heart of Conclave Station Oral, wide enough to park 3 of Earth's largest aircraft carriers side by side. Holographic banners floated above each species delegation, displaying their flags, their sigils, their colours. The air smelled faintly of something chemical, something none of us could quite identify, which the Conclave's environmental systems produced to stay neutral for all species. It had always made me slightly dizzy. Ambassador Osei was already seated when I reached our delegation's section. She was a tall woman, 61 years old, with short grey hair and the kind of stillness that comes from decades of watching powerful people say dangerous things. She did not look at me when I sat down. She was watching the podium. The Vethkai High Speaker, a being called Sorothvel, stood at the centre of the chamber. The Vethkai were 6-limbed, their bodies covered in plates of pale mineral grey, their faces flat and expressionless in a way that human translators always struggled with. Sorothvel was speaking slowly, precisely, the way beings speak when they want every word to be permanent. He was describing the terms of what the conclave had just passed. The official title of the resolution was the Custodial Integration Act. That was the polite language. The language beneath the language that every diplomat in that room understood perfectly, was simpler. Humanity was to be placed under Vethkai administrative authority. Human colony ships would require Vethkai permits. Human trade routes would fall under Vethkai oversight. Human expansion into unclaimed space would be subject to Vethkai approval. The word no one was saying out loud was the word I kept hearing in my head over and over, louder with each passing second. Slaves, not in chains, not in cages, but bound, controlled, owned by paperwork and treaty language and the votes of 31 alien species who had decided that humanity was too young, too unpredictable, too small to be trusted with its own future. I looked at the tally board again. I looked at the names of the species that had voted in favour. Some of them we had traded with for 40 years. Some of them had received medical research from Earth's universities. Some of them had sent their young to study alongside human students on orbital platforms. None of that had mattered today. Ambassador Osei finally turned to look at me. Her expression was calm. Not the calm of someone who was not afraid. The calm of someone who had already decided what came next. She spoke quietly, low enough that no one else in our section could hear. "Send the message home," she said. "Use the emergency channel. Use the word." I stared at her. I knew there was an emergency protocol. Every member of the diplomatic mission knew it existed. None of us had ever used it. None of us had believed we would ever need to. "The word?" I asked, though I already knew what she meant. "Sovereign?" she said. She turned back to face the podium. Sorothvel was still speaking. Around us, The chamber buzzed with the hum of translation devices, the rustle of beings shifting in their seats, the distant mechanical sound of the station's ventilation moving air through its enormous corridors. I opened my datapad. I found the emergency channel. My fingers were completely steady, which surprised me, because every other part of me felt like it was falling. I typed the word. I pressed send. I put the pad down and looked up at the tally board one more time. 3124. I memorized it. I wanted to remember exactly how it looked, that number, because I already understood, in some wordless place deep in my chest, that I was looking at the moment the galaxy made the worst mistake in its history. Sorothvel finished speaking. The chamber filled with a sound that the Vethkai made when they were satisfied, a low, rhythmic clicking that their plates produced, almost like polite applause. Several other species joined with their own equivalent gestures. Ambassador Osei did not move. She sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her, looking straight ahead. Composed. Unreadable. I watched her and thought about the word I had just sent. I thought about who was receiving it right now in offices and stations and facilities I had never been told the full details of. I thought about what that word would set in motion. I did not feel pride. I did not feel excitement. I felt the specific, heavy, hollow sensation of a door closing. And somewhere far away, I knew another door was opening. The delegate from the Dryesh species, a tall, thin being named Serath, who I had met briefly at a reception 3 months earlier, caught my eye from across the chamber. The Dryesh had been one of the 4 who voted against. Serath held my gaze for a moment. His species had no facial muscles capable of human expression, but there was something in the way he looked at me that felt unmistakably like a warning. Not for us. For them. I did not understand it yet. But I filed it away. The session adjourned 20 minutes later. I walked out of the grand chamber beside Ambassador Osei. We did not speak. The corridor outside was long and lit with soft gold light, and it curved gently away in both directions into the heart of the station. Other delegations passed us, talking quietly among themselves, some looking at us with curiosity, some with the kind of studied neutrality that tells you someone has already decided you are no longer worth watching closely. Osei stopped walking when we were alone in the corridor. She faced me. "Did you send it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded once. She looked down the corridor, toward nothing in particular, and something moved across her face just for a moment that I had never seen there before. Something that was not quite grief and not quite anger and not quite relief, but contained some element of all 3. Then it was gone. The stillness returned. "Good," she said. She started walking again. I followed. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my quarters on the station and watched the stars through the small circular window above my bunk. Somewhere out there, my planet was receiving a single word, and somewhere out there, people I had never met were beginning to move. I did not know what they would do, but I knew they had been ready. I did not understand what the word sovereign actually meant until 3 days after the vote, when Ambassador Osei called me into her office on the station and handed me a sealed briefing file bearing the classification level I had never once encountered in my 14 months of service. I sat across from her small desk. She watched me read. The file was 43 pages long. I read all of it without stopping. By the time I finished, the station around me felt different. The gold-lit corridors, the hum of alien machinery, the distant clicking of Vethkai plate speech, all of it felt thinner, like a stage set. like something constructed around a reality that had been hiding underneath the whole time. I set the file down. How long has this existed? I asked. The planning began in 2349, Osei said. 14 years before you were born. I thought about that for a moment. 2349 was the year the Vethkai had blocked humanity's first formal application for independent colony rights in the Kepler Belt. The conclave had upheld the block. Earth had filed a diplomatic protest. The protest had been acknowledged and quietly set aside. That was the public record. The private record was what I had just read. In the months following that block, a small group within the UN Security Council had reached a conclusion that they shared with no one outside a circle of 9 people. The conclusion was this: the Galactic Conclave would never grant humanity equal standing through negotiation alone. The Conclave's structure rewarded the species that were already powerful. Newcomers, especially small and young species, were expected to grow slowly under the careful supervision of established members. The system was not designed to produce equality. It was designed to preserve existing hierarchies under the appearance of order. The 9 people in that circle made a decision. They would negotiate. They would smile. They would send ambassadors and sign agreements and participate in every conclave session with perfect diplomatic courtesy. And at the same time, quietly, they would build. The file described what had been built over the following 38 years. I read the numbers 3 times each, because each time I thought I had misread them. Shipyards. Hidden inside the asteroid belt, disguised as mining operations, concealed behind electromagnetic fields that read as natural rock formations to conclave survey equipment. The largest was called Site 7. I had never heard of it. Most people on Earth had never heard of it. The workers who staffed it signed agreements that made the old wartime secrecy protocols look casual. Weapons research. Not the kind of weapons research that appeared in Earth's treaty disclosures, the sort that the Conclave reviewed every 4 years. A separate program, entirely off the books, running in parallel, drawing on the full depth of human physics, engineering, and the one area where our species had, over centuries of painful and costly experience, developed genuine expertise: warfare. Other species had studied Earth's history. The Conclave's anthropologists had done extensive work on humanity's record of internal conflict. Their conclusion, which I had heard referenced in polite conversation at diplomatic receptions, was that humans were a naturally quarrelsome species that had burned enormous energy fighting itself and arrived at the galactic stage already tired. They had read the data correctly. They had understood it completely wrong. The wars had not tired us. Every generation that lived through one had passed something to the next, not just trauma, but knowledge. How to organize, how to supply a force across vast distances, how to adapt when a plan failed, how to keep going when everything was harder than expected, how to look at an impossible situation and find the one angle it had not considered. 40 years of space travel had not erased those instincts. They had redirected them. I thought about Serath, the Draish delegate, watching me from across the chamber with that quiet, unreadable expression. He had voted against the decree. On the morning of the 4th day after the vote, I requested a private meeting with Serath through the station's diplomatic scheduling system. He accepted within the hour. We met in one of the small neutral meeting rooms the station maintained for sensitive conversations. The room had no recording systems, or rather, the Conclave claimed it had no recording systems, which meant both of us spoke carefully regardless. Serath stood rather than sitting. His species was more comfortable upright. He was 2 heads taller than me. his limbs thin and slightly iridescent under the room's light, his eyes large and dark in a face that curved gently inward at the centre. "You voted against?" I said. "Yes," he said. "You were one of 4 species." "Yes." I waited. Serath looked at me for a moment. In the way his species processed speech, there was always a slight pause, something in the translation, or perhaps simply something in how his mind worked. "We voted against," he said at last, "because we have done what the others have not. Which is, we read your history carefully," he said. "Not your diplomatic history, your full history. Everything." I said nothing. I let him continue. "Other species looked at your wars and saw chaos," Seraph said. "They saw a young species that had not yet learned to control itself. They decided you were emotional and unstable, and therefore low risk to manage." He paused again. "We looked at the same history and saw something different," he said. "We saw a species that had been through catastrophe after catastrophe and had never once stopped. A species that lost entire generations and rebuilt. A species that had never, in its recorded history, simply given up." I felt something move in my chest that I could not name. "The others believe you will petition the conclave," Serath said. "They believe you will negotiate the terms of the Custodial Act. Perhaps protest formally. Perhaps withdraw cooperation in small ways. They believe this because it is what every other species has done when placed in a similar position." He looked at me directly. His large dark eyes held something that, across all the differences between our species and his, I recognized clearly. He was afraid, not of me, of what was coming. "They do not know what you sent," he said quietly. "They do not know what it means. But I have studied your species for 11 of your years, and when I saw your ambassador's face after the vote, I knew that something had already been set in motion." He paused one final time. "I wanted to tell you," he said, "that the Drash will not stand against you. Whatever happens." I thanked him. We walked out of the room in separate directions. I went back to my quarters and sat on my bunk and looked at the stars. On the 14th day after the vote, the Vethkai issued their first enforcement order. All human vessels in the Kepler belt were to stand down and submit to Vethkai administrative boarding within 30 days. Human colonial installations on 3 Kepler belt worlds were to transfer operational authority to appointed Vethkai administrators within the same period. The order was transmitted to the United Earth Mission on Conclave Station Oral at 0600 station time. Earth's response arrived 12 hours later. It was a single document. No protests, no appeals, no requests for review or renegotiation. The document formally withdrew humanity from every conclave treaty, agreement, and framework, effective immediately. It acknowledged receipt of the enforcement order. It provided precise GPS coordinates of the Kepler Belt colonial installations, and at the bottom, in plain text, with no capitalization, no dramatic language, no threat of any kind, just a statement of fact, 7 words long: "The next vessel that enters uninvited does not return." I read those 7 words 4 times. Then I closed the document. Then I sat very still for a long time. I thought about Site 7. I thought about 38 years of quiet work in the dark of the asteroid belt. I thought about the 9 people who had made a decision in 2349 and said nothing to anyone. I thought about the Vethkai fleet that was, at this moment, preparing to enforce an order against a species they believed was tired. I thought about Serath's face. 30 days, I thought. The galaxy had 30 days before it found out exactly how wrong it had been. I requested assignment to the Kepler Belt Colonial Governor's Station as an embedded civilian observer and journalist of record. Ambassador Osei approved the request in under 2 minutes. She did not tell me to stay safe. She told me to keep detailed notes. I boarded a transport ship the following morning. I looked out the window as we pulled away from Conclave Station, Oral. The station was enormous, built over generations, the political centre of everything the galaxy called civilized. It looked, for the first time, very small. The Vethkai fleet arrived on the 31st day. I was standing in the observation bay of Colonial Governor Lena Hargrove's command post on Kepler Station 3 when the first alert came through. The bay was a wide, curved room with transparent walls that looked out over the colony's rooftops, and, above them, the dark expanse of open space. The planet below was amber and brown, dry and vast, still in the process of the slow terraforming that human engineers had been managing for 16 years. Governor Hargrove was a compact woman in her mid-50s with short dark hair and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent 3 decades solving problems in remote places. She stood beside me when the sensor display lit up. She did not flinch. 240 contacts, said the sensor officer. A young man named Callum, who had been on the station for 8 months, and had the specific look of someone who had been prepared for this, but was discovering that preparation and reality are very different things. Vethkai configuration. They're coming in on a standard approach vector, no evasive manoeuvring, no weapons hot. They're not expecting resistance, Hargrove said. No, I said. They're not. She looked at me. I looked back at her. They will, she said. It was not a question. I nodded. The Vethkai fleet dropped out of faster-than-light transit in a wide formation. Their ships were large, angular, dark blue in the way minerals are dark blue, not a colour chosen, but a natural product of their hull material, a composite alloy that Conclave technical assessors had rated among the strongest in the known galaxy. There were cruisers and support vessels and what the sensor display identified as 3 command ships, each the size of a small city block. The Vethkai commander opened the channel without waiting. His voice came through the translation system in the flat, measured tones that Vethkai used for what they considered routine administrative communication. He introduced himself as Fleet Administrator Dorath Vel, a relation of the High Speaker, I noticed, though I did not say so. He stated that he was here to implement the terms of the Custodial Integration Act. He directed Governor Hargrove to stand down all station systems, open the docking ports, and prepare colonial administration for transfer. He gave a timeline of 2 hours. His tone suggested he expected compliance in 1. Governor Hargrove pressed the transmit button. We acknowledge your transmission, Fleet Administrator, she said. Please hold your position. She released the button. She turned to Callum. Are they on sensors yet? She asked. Callum was watching his display. His face had gone very still. Yes, he said. Coming up on the far side of Kepler, 7G. I looked at the main display. The gas giant, Kepler 7G, sat in the middle distance, a massive planet of pale orange and brown bands, its rings thin and faint in the local starlight. The Vethkai fleet was positioned between us and the open belt, between us and the planet. They had positioned themselves, I realized, so that anything coming from the direction of the sun would have to come through them. That was good tactical thinking. It was also exactly what the people who planned this had counted on. The contacts appeared on the display slowly at first. 1, then 4, then 12. Then the system stopped counting individual contacts and switched to a density display because there were too many to render separately. The Vethkai fleet had 240 ships. What came around the curve of Kepler, 7G, had more than 2,000. They had been there the whole time. Running cold, no active emissions, tucked into the gas giant's electromagnetic shadow so perfectly that no conclave sensor had ever registered them. I would later learn that some of those ships had been in position for 4 years, rotating crews on silent transports, waiting without complaint. I pressed my hand against the observation bay wall to steady myself. The human fleet was unlike anything in any conclave registry. They were dark ships, not the dark blue of Vethkai hulls, but a deep, light-absorbing black, angular in ways that felt almost aggressive, as though they had been designed not just to fight, but to look like what they were. No decorative elements, no identification markings visible at this range. Just shape and mass and the absolute, quiet confidence of something that does not need to announce itself. Admiral Renata Solis opened a channel. I had not met her before. I had only read her name in the briefing file, but her voice, when it came through the speakers, was exactly what I had imagined, level and clear, with the particular quality of someone who has made peace with the weight of the moment they are in. Fleet Administrator Dorath Vel, she said. My name is Admiral Renata Solis of the Earth Defense Command. You are in human-claimed space. You were warned that this would not be permitted. You have 60 seconds to reverse your heading and exit this system. She paused. Not for drama. Just because 60 seconds is 60 seconds, and she was giving him the full count. Dorathvel's response came at the 30-second mark. Admiral, he said, and there was something in his translated voice that sounded almost amused. You command an unlisted fleet. There is no record of this force in any conclave disclosure. This is a violation of 40 seconds, Solis said. The Treaty of Shared Transparency, Article 14, which requires all member species to... You are no longer speaking to a member species, Solis said. 20 seconds. Pause. You cannot seriously intend. 10. Admiral, this is 5. Silence. Then the Vethkai fleet powered its weapons. I learned later, from the official record, that the engagement lasted 11 minutes and 14 seconds. From inside the observation bay of Kepler Station 3, it did not feel like 11 minutes. It felt like a single, continuous, overwhelming fact. The human fleet did not charge. It did not scramble or scatter. It moved with the kind of coordinated precision that comes from years of drilling and simulation and the cold, deep patience of people who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The Vethkai cruisers were fast. Their weapons were strong. Their commanders were not incompetent. None of that was enough. I will not describe the details of what I saw. Not because I cannot, but because the specifics are not the point. The point is this. 240 Vethkai warships entered human-claimed space with absolute confidence, and 11 minutes later, the human fleet broadcast an all-clear, and there was no Vethkai fleet anymore. 2 human ships were damaged. Both returned under their own power. I was sick in the corner of the observation bay, behind a monitoring console, with my back to the display. Callum handed me a cloth without a word. Governor Hargrove stood at the centre of the room with her arms folded, watching the display, her face carrying an expression I would spend a long time trying to understand. It was not triumph. It was not relief. It was something closer to the look of a person who has spent a very long time dreading a moment, and now the moment has passed, and they are not sure yet what comes next. She finally spoke. "Log it," she said. "Everything. Exact times, exact positions. I want the record complete." "Yes, Governor," Callum said. She looked at me. I straightened up. I probably looked terrible. "Are you writing this down?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded. She turned back to the display. The human fleet was already moving, redistributing into defensive positions around the colonial installations, calm and methodical, as though this were a routine exercise. The conclave went silent. Not the polite silence of a chamber between speakers. A different kind of silence. The silence of an enormous institution that has just discovered that the world does not match its model of it. 9 days passed. No transmissions from the conclave to any human channel. No diplomatic contacts. No statements. Nothing. I spent those 9 days on Kepler Station 3, writing everything I had seen. Governor Hargrove gave me access to the full sensor record. Admiral Solis sent a brief message through the Colonial Command Network. No commentary, just a status report. Human colonial installations in the Kepler Belt were secure. Earth Defense Command was positioned and alert, awaiting further orders. On the 10th day, Ambassador Osei sent me a message from Conclave Station Orel. 4 words: "Come back, bring notes." I packed everything I had and boarded the next transport. I looked back at Kepler Station 3 as we pulled away from the dock. The colony below was still amber and brown. The terraforming equipment was still running. The engineers, who had been working on this planet for 16 years, were still working on it. Life continued. That was, I thought, the whole point. The conclave had not invited us. That was the first thing Ambassador Osei told me when I arrived at Conclave Station Oral, 11 days after the engagement in the Kepler Belt. The emergency session had been called by the Vethkai High Speaker, Sorath Vel, and convened by the Conclave's Administrative Council. Every species with a standing delegation had been notified. We had not. The session was already in progress when our ship docked. We went in anyway. The delegation was 12 people. Ambassador Osei led. I was positioned at the back, with my datapad and the full record of everything I had witnessed, compiled into a document I had titled simply the Kepler Record. Admiral Solis was not present. She was still commanding the defense posture in the belt. But the ship we arrived in was a vessel that several station personnel stopped to look at as we docked, because it was considerably larger than the transport ships the human mission typically used, and its hull carried the same light-absorbing black finish I had seen on the fleet above Kepler, 7G. Someone had made that choice deliberately. The Grand Chamber was full. Every delegation was present, which was unusual for an emergency session. The air was thick with the chemical smell of the environmental system working at maximum capacity to keep everyone comfortable. Translation devices hummed at every seat. The holographic tally board above the chamber was dark. This session was not a vote. Not yet. We walked in through the main entrance. The chamber had been mid-speech. One of the Murani delegates was at the podium, but the speaking stopped. Every being in that room turned to look at us. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable for us. I think it was meant to be. I think whoever had arranged our deliberate exclusion from the notification list had expected that, if we appeared anyway, the sheer weight of the chamber's attention would create a kind of pressure that would make us stop, explain ourselves, perhaps even apologize. Ambassador Osei walked to the human delegation section and sat down. We followed. I sat. I put my datapad on the desk. I looked straight ahead. The Murani delegate at the podium, a broad, short being named Teth Aori, who I recognized from previous sessions, looked at us for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the podium. Not in anger, in a gesture I would later understand was respect. He was giving us the floor. Halsey looked at me. I nodded. She stood and walked to the podium. She was not a tall woman. The conclave's podium was sized for beings considerably larger than any human. She stood at it and looked out at the chamber, and the chamber looked back at her. And for a moment, there was nothing but the hum of ventilation and translation systems. She spoke without notes. 31 of you voted to place humanity under custodial authority, she said. You did this because you believed you understood what we are. You studied our history, and you concluded that we were a young species, fractious and undisciplined, capable of causing local problems, but not significant ones. You believed that managing us was a reasonable administrative measure. She paused, not for effect. She was simply speaking at the pace of someone who has thought carefully about every word. You were wrong about what you were managing, she said. And you were wrong about what would happen if you tried. Soreth Vel, seated at the Vethkai delegation's table, straightened. He did not stand to interrupt, which told me his advisers had warned him not to make that move. But his plates shifted in the way that Vethkai plates shift when they are preparing to speak with authority. You lost a fleet, Halsey said, looking directly at him. 240 warships in 11 minutes, in our space, against our people, who were defending installations that we built with our own resources over 16 years. You came to enforce an administrative order. You were stopped. The chamber was completely still. I am not here to threaten anyone, she said. I am here to be clear, because clarity is what this situation requires. Humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Conclave, not as a protest, not as a negotiating position, permanently. We do not recognize the Custodial Integration Act. We do not recognize any conclave authority over our space, our ships, our colonies, or our people. These are not demands. They are facts. Soreth Vel stood. He was large. Even seated and standing, he filled the space around him. His voice, when it came through the translation system, carried the practiced weight of someone accustomed to having his words treated as final. You cannot simply remove yourself from the conclave, he said. The conclave is the structure of civilized space. Every species in this chamber has agreed to its framework. The alternative is chaos. Halsey looked at him. She took a breath. Order, she said, is not the same thing as justice. You had 60 years to learn the difference. You chose not to. The words landed in the room like something physical. I watched the chamber. I watched individual delegates. The Morani delegation, 3 beings who had voted against the Custodial Act, exchanged a look among themselves. The Dryas delegation sat very still. Cherath, whom I could see from my position, was watching Halsey with an expression I recognized. Not surprise, recognition. We are open to new agreements, Halsey continued, her voice unchanged. Bilateral agreements. Agreements between equal parties negotiated freely with terms that apply to both sides. We are willing to trade, to cooperate on research, to coordinate on shared concerns like navigation hazards and deep space emergencies. We have no interest in being anyone's enemy. She looked around the room. But we will not be anyone's subordinate. Not again. Not ever. She stepped away from the podium and walked back to our section. She sat down. I realized I had not breathed in approximately 2 minutes. I breathed. Soreth Vel remained standing. He looked at the Conclave's Administrative Council, 4 beings seated in a raised section above the main floor. I call for a vote, he said. on authorizing a coalition military response to Earth's unlawful military action in the Kepler belt. The council chair, a thin being with 4 arms whose species I could never remember the name of, looked around the room. The motion requires a supporting petition from 12 member species, the chair said. Fleet Administrator, please obtain the supporting signatures before we proceed. Soroth Vel turned to the chamber. He waited. The Murani delegation did not raise their hands. The Dryish delegation did not raise their hands. The 4 small species who had voted against the Custodial Act did not raise their hands. Others, who had voted in favor of the Custodial Act, sat quietly, looking at their desks, looking at the ceiling, looking anywhere but at the Vethkai delegation. Soroth Vel waited for 90 seconds. He did not reach 12 signatures. He sat down. In the silence that followed, Teth Aori of the Murani delegation stood and formally requested placement on the open floor to address the human delegation directly. The council chair granted it. Teth Aori turned to our table. The Murani Collective, he said, requests the opening of bilateral talks with the United Earth Mission at a time and place of Earth's choosing, toward the formation of a new cooperative framework. He sat down before the echo of his words had finished moving through the chamber's translation systems. A second delegation stood, then a third, then 2 more at once, so that the council chair had to call for order. 5 species in less than 4 minutes, all requesting bilateral talks with us, all stepping away from the conclave's framework towards something they did not have a name for yet, but that was forming in real time in the middle of that chamber. The galaxy was rearranging itself. I could feel it happening. I looked across the room at Serath. He was watching the chamber too. He turned, and our eyes met. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he did something with his long, thin neck. A slight incline forward, barely perceptible. Anode? Ambassador Osai leaned close to me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Keep writing, she said. I typed. 6 months later, I sat in my mother's kitchen in Nairobi. The window above the sink looked east, toward the hills, and in the evening the sky went gold and then deep red before it turned dark. I had grown up watching that particular sequence of colours. When I was a child, I had thought it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Now it seemed extraordinary to me, though I could not have explained precisely why. My mother had made tea. I was not drinking it. I was looking at the window. You are very quiet, she said. I have a lot to think about, I said. She sat across from me. She was 63 years old, still working 3 days a week as a secondary school science teacher, still entirely unimpressed by things that were supposed to be impressive. When I'd called her from Conclave Station Oral on the day of the vote, she had listened to the whole story and then said, practically, that she supposed someone was going to have to sort it out, and she hoped I was taking care of my health. People keep asking me. I said, whether I'm proud. And I don't know yet. She wrapped her hands around her own cup and looked at me steadily. Tell me what is making you uncertain, she said. I thought about how to answer that. I had been thinking about it for 6 months, and I still had not found the right shape for it. We won, I said. The Kepler Belt colonies are secure. We have 14 bilateral agreements with other species now. More being negotiated. The old conclave is falling apart. Some of its members are joining the new cooperative framework we're building. Others are pulling back into themselves. The Vethkai haven't made peace with us, but they haven't moved against us again either. By any measure you could apply, we're in a better position than we were a year ago. But, she said, 11 minutes, I said. 240 ships in 11 minutes. She was quiet. I keep thinking about who was on those ships, I said. Not the Vethkai High Speaker, not Sorafvel, the crews, the beings who were following orders, the same way people have always followed orders, because orders come from above and you trust that the people above you know what they're doing. Did they know what they were doing? My mother asked. The people above them? No, I said. They genuinely had no idea what they were sailing into. They thought we were small and manageable. They thought enforcing the order would be straightforward. And the people who built the fleet, she said. Did they know? I thought about the briefing file. The 9 people in 2349. The 38 years of quiet, careful, deliberate preparation. The shipyards in the asteroid belt. The weapons programs that never appeared in any treaty disclosure. The thousands of crew members who had run silent aboard those dark ships for years, waiting. They knew exactly what they were doing, I said. My mother nodded. She looked at her tea. Then the question you are really asking, she said, is whether it was right. Yes, she thought about that for a while. She was a science teacher, and she approached questions with the habit of considering multiple angles before committing to an answer. The Vethkai proposed to own us, she said finally. Legally, with the approval of 31 other species. That is what the vote was. Yes. And we said no. Yes. With a fleet. Yes. She tilted her head slightly. Would they have accepted no without the fleet? I did not answer right away. I thought about Sorethvel at the podium on the day of the vote. The satisfied clicking of Vethkai plates. The 11 abstentions from species that could have stopped it but chose not to. I thought about 38 years of diplomatic protest that had been acknowledged and set aside. No, I said, they would not have. Then the fleet was the answer to the question they were asking, she said. The question was, what are you going to do about it? And the answer was the fleet. People died, I said. Beings died. Yes, she said, because they came to take what was not theirs. She said it simply, without anger, without celebration, just a fact. I know, I said. I know you're right. I do know that. But I also think I stopped. I tried again. I think it's possible for something to be necessary and still to carry weight afterward. I don't want to feel light about it. I don't think we should. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand briefly over mine. That is why I am not worried about you, she said. I looked at her. The people who scare me, she said, are the ones who don't feel that weight. The ones who look at 11 minutes and only see a victory. You are not one of those people. That is good. Hold on to it. I thought about Admiral Solis's voice on the channel, counting down from 60, the complete absence of excitement in it, the total flatness. Not the flatness of someone who didn't care, but of someone who cared so much they had burned all the drama out of the moment long before it arrived. I thought about Governor Hargrove standing in the observation bay, arms folded, watching the display with that complicated expression I had spent 6 months trying to name. I thought about Ambassador Osei in the conclave chamber, hands folded on the table, watching the tally board reach 31. None of them had been light about it. I talked to Sarath last week, I said. The Draesh ambassador. What did he say? He told me his people have a concept. He translated it as, the species that flinches last. The idea is that the most dangerous force in the galaxy is not the one that strikes first. It's the one that absorbs every injustice and every dismissal and every humiliation and holds it all and remembers it all and then, at the moment that matters, does not flinch. My mother was quiet for a moment. Did he mean us? She said. Yes, I said. He said his historians had been watching for a species that fit the definition for a long time. He said they had marked us as the candidate over 40 years ago, based on our history, based on the pattern of endurance, she said. He called it something else, I said. He called it loyalty to the future. The idea that you can suffer something in the present if you believe that what you are protecting will outlast the suffering. My mother looked at the window. The light outside was starting to shift toward evening. That sounds like something Earth people understand, she said. He said the same thing. I said. We sat together for a while without speaking. The kitchen smelt like tea and the particular warmth of a house that has been a home for a long time. Outside, the neighbourhood was doing what it always did. Children calling to each other in the street, someone's music drifting from an open window, the distant sound of a vehicle on the road that curved around the hill. Life continuing. Ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. I thought about the 14 bilateral agreements, the new cooperative framework that had no name yet but was growing, species by species, as others stepped away from the old conclave structure towards something that did not yet exist but was being built in real time. I thought about the colony engineers on Kepler Station 3, still running their terraforming equipment, still doing the patient, slow, 16 years in progress work of making a new world livable. I thought about what Seraph had said in that neutral meeting room on Conclave Station Orel, before any of it had happened. His large dark eyes, and the thing in them I had recognized. Despite every difference between our species, he had been afraid for the Vethkai. Not contemptuous, not satisfied, afraid. He had studied our history, and he had seen what the others had missed, and he had been afraid for them, because he knew what patience that long eventually becomes when it finally moves. I was glad the Dryish had voted against. I was glad there were beings in the galaxy who had looked at us clearly, early, without needing a demonstration. I thought about the Vethkai. They were still there. Sorath Vel was still High Speaker. The intelligence reports that crossed Ambassador Osei's desk described a species in an internal argument, some factions pushing toward negotiation with Earth, others insisting on a harder position, waiting for allies, waiting for a moment. The war, if there was going to be one, was not over. It had not truly begun in the Kepler Belt. The Kepler Belt had only been the demonstration that changed the conversation. What came next was what I thought about most. Not with fear, something else, something steadier. I pulled out my data pad. The document I had been keeping since the day of the vote was now 212 pages long. It was still growing. I had a working title for it that I had not shown anyone yet. I scrolled to the end and typed a new entry. Nairobi, Earth, evening. 6 months after the Kepler Belt. The light outside is doing what it always does here. My mother is washing up the cups. I can hear the neighbourhood. I can hear, very faintly, the kind of normal human sound that is so ordinary I stopped noticing it years ago, and now I notice every second of it. We signed 2 more bilateral agreements this week. A third species has formally requested talks. The new framework has no name, but it has 17 members, and more are approaching. The Vethkai are quiet. That does not mean they are finished. It means they are thinking. We are thinking too. That is the state we are in. 2 species, and several dozen others, all thinking very carefully because everyone now knows what the thinking eventually produces. I do not know what comes next. I know that it will require the same thing. Everything has always required from us patience and work, and the willingness to hold on through the parts that are hard, because the future on the other side of the hard part is worth it. Ambassador Osei called this morning. She asked if my notes were ready. I told her they were close. She told me to finish them. I am finishing them. We are a species that has been told, in ways large and small, that we are not enough. Not old enough, not advanced enough, not calm enough, not large enough, not important enough to be treated as equal by the powers that had already decided the shape of things before we arrived. We kept working anyway. We kept building. We kept reaching into space and planting colonies and sending signals and learning and changing and failing and starting again. We held on to the future the way you hold on to something that cannot be taken from you if you never let go. The galaxy called us slaves. We answered, not with words, not with a petition, not with an appeal to the better nature of beings who had already decided what we were worth. We answered with 38 years of quiet work and 2,000 ships rising from behind a gas giant on the 31st day, and a voice on an open channel that counted down from 60 without a single tremor. I am not entirely proud. Pride is too simple for what I feel. I am certain. We are here. We are not going anywhere. We will not be moved by anyone who mistakes our patience for weakness, our kindness for submission, or our history of endurance for a sign that we do not know our own worth. The galaxy is changing. We are changing with it, and we are changing it, and the two things are the same. Outside, the sky has gone red. In a minute it will go dark, and the stars will appear, and they will look exactly the way they always have, distant, cold, bright, and full of everything we have not done yet. I am ready. We are ready. We always were.